Good morning, I'm Gabe Pressman. In keeping with the WNBC TV tradition of airing debates and major races before Election Day, today in a special expanded edition of News Forum, two races will be presented. Edward Regan, the state controller, versus Herman Badillo. And at 12 noon, the contest between Congressman Joseph DioGuardi and Bella Abzug in Westchester, Abzug trying to take his place in Washington. In the 20th Congressional District, Republican Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, who won his seat in Westchester 2 years ago, is being challenged by a former Congresswoman, Bella Abzug, trying for a political comeback. Welcome to both of you. Let's start out by talking about the summit meeting in Reykjavik and President Reagan's and President Reagan's decision not to give up on the Strategic Defense Initiative, so-called Star Wars. Since you are going to be sitting, if you get elected, Ms. Abzug, and you will be sitting in the future, Congressman DioGuardi, if you're successful in being reelected, on matters that involve the foreign policy of the United States, what's your reaction to what happened there, Congressman?
Well, I supported the President's policies. I have supported his policies on the Strategic Defense Initiative. And frankly, while I was disappointed, as was the American public, I think that we were proud that the President stood firm. It was the strength that President Reagan brought to this country that brought the Soviets to the talking table. Who would have thought 3 years ago that we would have had 1 or 2 summits and maybe now looking for a third? I see this as a cause for optimism. We've made some breakthroughs, but when we're talking about a defense initiative, which is what that is, what's the problem? With the Soviets, we have a history of not being able to trust them. Look at what they've done with the Helsinki Accords, basic human rights, the Jews in the Soviet Union. How can we make an agreement that we can't in some way have an insurance policy for? And I see the SDI as our insurance policy. And it's a defense program.
Ms. Abzug?
I think I'm very disappointed in both President Reagan and Secretary General Gorbachev. I'd hope that they would be able to move forward this historic agreement, which apparently took place there, namely to rid us of the anti-ballistic threat so that we can begin to commit ourselves and our resources to the programs that we need and feel that there is peace up the line for us. The Strategic Defense Initiative as a shield has been questioned, and its feasibility has been questioned by 50 Nobel laureates and 700 members of the National Academy of Sciences. In fact, in today's paper, people who are actually working on it are suggesting it has a lot of problems. Senator Nunn, who was a leading arms exponent in the Senate, has said, you know, one has to question that feasibility of stopping 7,000 to 8,000 missiles when there are hundreds of thousands of decoys and we don't even have the software or the computers to deal with it. And so I think that we've got to begin to negotiate seriously and not to allow a $1 trillion or a $3 trillion folly, as Tom Wicker said, to stand in the way of insisting that President Reagan and Senator Gorbachev and Secretary General Gorbachev get back to the table, because the hope of the world's peace and world programs and human programs that we need in the states, in our state, in our county, in our district, is at stake.
But Gabe,
so you think the president was wrong? Is that
I think there should have been some form of adjournment and say, well, all right, we have this disagreement. We'll have to have another meeting to discuss it, another pre-summit meeting, and so on. And I think that to hold it up based upon a limitation, which is now not clear. It may be just that they want the shield to conform to the ABM treaty. It's not clear that they wanted us to do anything more than that. And I think that it was, therefore, a very serious break at a moment when there was progress being made by both sides.
You think the president was wrong in standing so firmly on that particular point?
I do. I think there should have been more flexibility.
Congressman?
I don't think so. If the program had so many problems, what are the Soviets afraid of? We're talking about basically a strategic defense initiative, a shield, one that the president himself said would be applied to both sides. Well, we cannot, we have seen over the years, Ms. Abzug, that we cannot trust the Soviet Union. We made a grain deal with them this year, and do you know they reneged on the grain deal at the last minute?
President Nixon said,
they don't keep any agreement.
As President Nixon said about defensive weapons, if two gladiators are fighting each other, and one then gets a shield in addition to his sword, he has two weapons. He has his sword, and then he has his shield, behind which he can conduct an offensive attack as he is defending himself. And the concern, I think, is And this is a concern that one has to realize is a possibility, that we may be dealing with a defensive shield at this moment, which could be converted, as some scientists have suggested, into an offensive first strike weapon. And I think there's a lot of, you know, suspicion on both sides, and we have to find an atmosphere in which to conduct negotiations, which 57% of the people want to see, which is an atmosphere in which there has to be some understanding of this issue.
We cannot make an agreement on their terms. This is the issue. And the president did absolutely the right thing. The Russians are used to getting agreements made on their terms, and they right away break them. When they can show us they can keep basic agreements with human rights, I'd be the first one to start trusting them. Right now, I think we need that safety net.
I must say
Why is it ridiculous?
Because the fact is that what is apparent here is that there was agreement on both sides to try to curb the most serious threat to civilization, which is the nuclear arms race. Secondly, the agreements that were reached were also to reach the question of human rights in the Soviet Union, so that what was at stake is some of the things that the congressman or Joe was complaining about. They were also going to discuss the right of emigration of Jews, the right of dissidents. That also, I think, is lost when you break off an agreement. And also various regional agreements with respect to Afghanistan and so on. So I think that you lose a precious opportunity. It is also clear that there is a mutually beneficial objective here, that we have verifiable, mutual cutbacks in arms, which can really relieve us of the tremendous fears that we all have for destruction of this civilization, and the need that we have to build our nation, to build our district that we're both seeking to represent.
One last comment, Congressman.
Well, I think Ms. Abzug's view of this is distorted. The precious opportunity to talk about human rights and all the things that she's referring to came about because we had the Strategic Defense Initiative. The Soviets know they're behind us at least 10 years in computer technology. Now, you know what they want us to do? Stop researching so they can catch up. And what are they going to do when they catch up? I mean, we have no cause to trust the Soviets at this point. We certainly want to make an agreement. I want to see every nuclear weapon disarmed and gotten rid of.
Well, I'm glad
I think we have to do that. There's no question. But we can't do it on their terms.
I don't think you should do it on terms of one nation or another, but on the mutual human terms. Nations and people have to bring about peace. These nuclear weapons can only bring about war. And I also want to say very simply that there is no evidence whatsoever that there is a shield which can really change the picture. From the beginning of civilization to now, whether it was the bow and arrow or the gunpowder, none of those technological advances have brought about peace. We have to begin once and for all to realize that we have to bring peace. We don't have to love the Soviets. We don't have to care about them. We only have to care about our own people.
The Soviets have their own research program. They've already violated agreements. They have the major radar installation at Krasnoyarsk. I think that we've got to stick to what we've done. I think the president did a marvelous job.
Let me ask you a question, Congressman, about the elderly, but first I want to ask you a question, Ms. Abzug, about marijuana. Congressman DioGuardi has charged that you introduced a bill 12 years ago for the legalization of marijuana. Did you do that, and do you regret doing it?
No, no such thing. You know, this is an interesting question that you ask. A member of Congress has to have a record of performance in terms of legislative needs of the district, which Mr. DioGuardi hasn't got in any effective way. He also has to serve his constituents, which he hasn't, and he hasn't given any leadership. But most of all, he's been raising a question as to his credibility. These legislation that he's talking about is a bill introduced by Ed Koch, which several of us co-sponsored, which sought to deal with a very serious problem at the time. The problem was that there were laws which could put people who were using marijuana for private purposes in jail up to 15 years. A lot of young children were being arrested for using marijuana, which I always opposed. The legalization of which I have always opposed to this very day. Then putting them in jail with hardened criminals, serving draconian terms, and also not really going after the drug pushers and those who are applying the trade. This was intended to decriminalize. In fact, by the time we introduced the last bill of the series that Mr. DioGuardi has referred to, the law was begun to be changed so that it now, in this state, and in most states in the nation, has a decriminalization in that it is a misdemeanor or a violation
You
to
don't
possess
regret
marijuana.
introducing that or
No, I think it
co-sponsoring
was very crucial to help not put kids away with hardened criminals. I think that was a very important thing. This bill was supported by Charles Rangel, who's head of the Narcotics Committee that the congressman serves on, by Liz Holtzman and by others, because it was necessary to show that the law had to be changed.
Congressman.
Okay. Let me repeat what Mario Cuomo said in 1977, I think it was, Bella. Bella, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying, and you're good at it. Now, I brought the bills with me, Gabe. One bill is on decriminalization, 3 of them on legalization. Let me now read a couple of paragraphs from the bill. My turn, Bella. Not only would this bill allow the possession in a public area of marijuana in reasonable amounts, paragraph 2 of the bill says to distribute, transfer, or sell in a public or private place any marijuana. We're talking about the public sale in a public place for private use. Now, to go further, a reasonable amount, because we're talking about these poor kids, and I agree with this one joint. The last paragraph says that a reasonable amount is defined as 3 ounces. Now, let me show you something here, Gabe. If I can get 3 ounces, pretty big. This is a 3-ounce bag of, or at least this is what a 3-ounce bag of marijuana would look like. We've weighed this very carefully. Now,
What's in there?
Parsley. The point is that we're hardly talking about kids being put in jail for smoking 1 joint. There's enough substance in this bag to intoxicate over 300 kids. This would have been the gateway to poisoning a whole generation of kids. So it's not the rhetoric of decriminalization, it's making it legal.
Joe, I have
There's
to
no
tell
doubt.
you that this is, I heard about this little trick of yours, and what this amounts to is baloney. I have here a pound of baloney.
Well, let's
I
mix
heard
it up.
about
It'll
this.
taste pretty good.
I'll tell you what, I'll take the parsley,
No, we'll
because
leave it
I'll
right
do the
here, because
cooking
I
in my
may-
old tradition,
I may need
and
this.
I'll mix it up with the baloney, okay?
But the point is...
The fact is that this
Gabe,
is just pure baloney.
for the record, there are
now,
3
I
bills.
just want to point out to you that this is really a very slanderous statement. In fact, I worked very hard on the question of drugs. With Charlie Rangel, we went to the Golden Triangle to get rid of the supply. We worked to create drug enforcement. We worked
The Golden
to create
Triangle being Burma.
Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia during the war, to try to eliminate the supply, to provide for drug prevention programs, enforcement, and so on. The congressman has issued a statement that he knows, having worked with me and having supported this bill. This is the man at the head of the committee. Your own chairman supported this bill. Just a moment.
He's not running against
but,
me.
I mean, the point
You are.
is, that
You
is
said
not
that-
the point.
you
I
said
wish
that
to make
Ed
clear
Koch
to you.
twisted your arm. Well, he must
I
have
never
twisted it
said
pretty hard.
anybody-
It must be black and blue, because there are 4 bills here, not 1.
All right. First of all, I want to show that you don't know anything about the legislative process. The one bill is the same bill, reintroduced with
3
additional
times.
sponsors.
But it was to
Reintroduced.
legalize, not to decriminalize.
It was totally to
legalize.
decriminalize.
The sale
and
in
fact,
public places in reasonable amounts for
kids,
private use.
That all that meant.
Kids could have bought it in schoolyards.
okay.
All that meant was that kids was
Bella,
passing
Mario
marijuana
Cuomo
towards
said-
each other, to each other. This was a well-known problem that existed at the time this bill was introduced. The fact is that you should know this, which I'm sure you do not, and that is that this bill was fashioned on the Marijuana Commission of President Nixon, whose commission reported that there should be the decriminalization. Would you want to restore the provisions that existed then, that kids who use the marijuana, which I oppose, and which kids in Westchester do, unfortunately, to my deep regret, would you want the restoration of a 15-year term in which kids could be... I want to ask you to answer that question.
The issue is to educate these kids not to use it in the first place.
I agree with you.
That's the issue
but
here, education.
Do you want
and
to
Gabe,
restore
you've pointed
those
out
laws?
the #1 problem we have in Westchester
would you
County
answer
today.
that question?
It's drugs. There are vials of crack all over our street.
Okay, all right.
Do you want to
I
answer
wonder
that
how
question?
much crack she would allow used today.
Well, that is a scurrilous statement.
Well, like some of the ones
I
that you've
have
made.
opposed any legalization of any drug,
These
marijuana
bills,
included.
You don't have to be
Would
an
you-
attorney, Bella,
would you answer
to
me?
look at legalization.
I know, but that's what the commission provided. That's what the National Commission that Mr. Nixon set up provided. That's what, in fact, has become the law. Would you want to
Dave,
restore the
my
original
record
law?
on drugs is clear.
Would you answer
I
that
have been
question?
involved with the Phoenix House
I'd like
as a
an
citizen
answer
for
to that
over 10
question.
All right.
years.
Ms.
I
Abzug
came-
has asked you a question. Would you want to restore the law with the big penalties for possession of marijuana?
For kids.
Obviously not, but I want to obviously
that's
deal
all.
with the issue. She's
So
dealing
we
with the
tried
symptoms.
to
We got to
meal-
deal with the problem. The problem is educating
Okay.
our kids not to use these substances, not to give them the gateway to poison. This would have poisoned a whole generation of kids. They would have been zombies.
Okay.
Can you imagine this laying around the house? It's bad enough we
She's
have
asked
alcohol.
you a question. Do you want to ask her one?
This is baloney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask her one? You have the right to.
I just show you.
No,
Ask
wait
me
a minute,
question
wait.
about how I feel about drugs, Joe.
Bella,
Ask about
no,
the fact
he's-
that I spent
would
many
you-
years in the
Wait a
Congress.
minute,
with
hang
strong
on.
drug
Bella,
record.
Miss
you haven't
Abzug.
changed
Ask me that
one bit.
question.
You haven't changed
No.
one bit.
Oh, I mean,
Well,
that's why people
all
love
right.
me, because
All right.
I am
Order,
the
please.
I
kind
think
of
the
person
issue
I
here is
am.
that the policies of Greenwich Village and the early 60s are not the policies for Westchester County in the 1980s, and that is the heart of this race game.
Okay.
Now,
Well,
the
well,
interesting thing about this issue, if I may answer another
Yeah.
point, is that despite the fact that Joe, like a lot of other politicians, are now jumping on the
businessman?
anti-drug bandwagon, the fact is that there was a lot
Wrong.
of silence for a long time in the
Wrong.
Congress. And, in fact, he voted against Treasury and appropriations and Postal Service appropriations, which would have provided money for drug enforcement,
Am I
for
entitled to my
Customs
question?
Service,
Absolutely.
and the rest.
I'll let you.
And-
I'll let you
and
ask.
he has not-
Congressman, I'll let you ask your question after we
Okay.
take a break. Okay.
Okay.
Right after that. Congressman, before I let you ask a question of Ms. Abzug, in fairness, I started the program by saying I was going to ask you about your record on the elderly, particularly Ms. Abzug's charge that you have displayed total ignorance and unconcern for them, and she singled out your vote against a bill that would have provided, as I understand it, cost of living adjustments for Social Security, and for another that would have reduced appropriations for assisting housing. Well, what's your answer to that?
Sheer nonsense, half-truths. I got a letter from a Democrat, James Roosevelt, last year, praising my stand on protecting the Social Security trust funds on the COLAs. I was one of the first congressmen to get
COLAs
on
being cost
the
of living increases,
adjustments.
right?
One of the first to get on the bill, I think it was Congressman Okar's bill, to give the COLAs to the senior citizens, in spite of the Graham-Rudman bill. I have done everything I could to protect that money which is so needed for the senior citizens in their retiring years. And anyone who tries to distort that record is lying. And I've got a letter from James Roosevelt, the son of FDR, who represents, by the way, a Democratic organization, which points that out.
What about
Let
you,
me
Ms.
say
Abzug?
that this is about the crass amount of lying, the most crass part of his distortion. He got a 30% rating from the National Council of Senior
A
Citizens,
Democratic organization.
which is an organization that rates
Democrat.
all members of Congress, Democrat and Republican. They're not for him, they're not for me. Now, but the most significant part of the distortion and the prevarication here is the fact that the organization he's referred to, James Roosevelt's organization, the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, which he has sent out a letter from in a mailing to the district, has actually endorsed me. And I got a letter from him over the phone when I received this mailing, in which James Roosevelt said, "We're pleased to give you the endorsement of the National Committee because throughout the time as a congresswoman, there was no member who was a stronger advocate. I received 100% voting record on Social Security." He's now attempting to distort my record.
No distortion.
In addition to which, James Roosevelt says, and I think you should hear this, there are some politicians who would like to try and get the electorate to believe all sorts of things. I cannot believe they would try and do that with you and your record on
Congressman.
senior citizens.
Did
This
James
is your
Roosevelt-
mailing in
did
which
he-
you say, I'm opposed to Social
Okay.
Security. In the face
All right.
of James Roosevelt's letter, in the face
All right.
of the 100% of my
You
three
have a-
terms in Congress,
the
from
point
the
is
National
clear.
Council
Okay.
of Senior Citizens.
Bella, a
Congressman.
little courtesy, please. The point is clear. Mr. Roosevelt did not withdraw his letter to me. That letter came last year. That letter was sent voluntarily by him and his organization.
It's sent to
And
lots of members of
That letter
Congress.
praised my positions on Social
Right.
Security. Okay?
All right, now let's go to the question.
My question.
You're entitled to a question to
The-
Ms.
the
Abzug
major
on
issue-
any matter.
All right, but the major issue facing Westchester County today is drugs. New York City is the capital of crack, this highly potent
Okay.
form
What
of
question do you
cocaine.
have for Ms. Abzug?
Well, the question I have is because I recently brought money from the district, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, to train 45 police officers in the county. And the question I have for Ms. Abzug is, why in 1974 did you vote against Reorganization Plan number 2, which would have created the DEA?
Everybody
That's
knows.
the Drug Enforcement Agency.
The Drug Enforcement Agency.
Right.
Everybody knows that that was part of an overall reorganization plan in which they were shifting 900 employees from customs service to immigration service, or out of immigration into customs. And it was a bill that was opposed by many in the Congress because of that reorganization. And it happens that if you knew the legislative process effectively,
I read it carefully.
we know that that was a reorganization bill, and 900 people were threatened about losing their jobs, and many members of Congress, therefore, voted against it to preserve those jobs. We all subsequently have been strong supporters, especially me, of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I have supported all of their authorizations. In fact, on several occasions in the last session of Congress, Joe voted against appropriations, which included appropriations for the Drug Enforcement Administration, for the Coast Guard, for the Customs Services, because he has been spending a lot of time in the Congress
I can't
not
get away
meeting
with
the
that. I
needs
voted
of
for the
people
Drug Omnibus
in
Bill, $2.1 billion.
All right. Congressman, say again. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of that.
I can't let her get away with that. I voted for the Drug Omnibus Bill, $2.1 billion, the one that just passed and somewhat scaled down through the Senate's version. So that's totally out of context.
That's not its appropriation. That was just
Totally
a bill
out of context.
which is an omnibus anti-drug bill, which I support, by the way.
Let's deal with some
but
other...
which actually does not provide the money. Where the money is concerned, he is always found wanting. You never put your bark where your bite is.
I do, but I want to be sure that we don't put this country into more and more debt, because our kids have got a legacy of debt.
And that's why you voted against
Let me show you
programs
something,
up
Gabe.
and down the line.
You know what this card is? This is the card that I use to vote to represent my constituency. Take a good hard look at it. This is the most expensive credit card in the world. This card has no limit. Congress applies money to programs with very little oversight, and what do? When you get a call from American Express diners or whatever, you sit down with your spouse, you look at what you're doing, economic reality sets in, the limit's reached. Not with this card. We keep bumping the limit. We reach $2 trillion, and we just keep passing it on to the kids. This is something that we've got to do. I have used this card responsibly.
But at the same time, I think you ought to know that he has voted against housing in the district, which gives him a 0 rating from the National League of Cities, against children's programs for education,
brought in senior citizens housing 2 weeks ago.
Which gave him a 10% rating with the Children's Defense Fund, against the environment, which gave him a 33% rating with the League of Conservation
All Democrat
Voters.
organizations.
And these are all nonpartisan organizations which rate Democrats and Republicans equally. In fact, they rate some of your Republican members much higher than you. It's because you do not serve the needs of the district, either in your voting or in your services.
But the Congressional Quarterly, an independent publication, praised my constituent service and said even Democrats are saying that Joe DioGuardi.
You have only one office. Everybody else has 2 and 3 offices. People can't reach you.
The issue is how you serve the public, Bella.
It's easier to get to Washington than to get to White Plains
I'm
to see
centrally
you.
located.
Fine. We have about a minute and a half left. In about 40 seconds, Ms. Abzug, can you ask the voters or tell the voters why you should be elected?
Yes. I'm a person of experience with a legislative record of having brought in $6 billion of programs into New York State, many of which affected Westchester, programs in housing, programs in education, programs in water pollution, sewage treatment, harbor cleanup, commuter transportation. I'm a person who has stood up to fight for the people whose needs are being neglected. They are not now being represented in the tradition of Dick Ottinger, who has been a strong member of Congress, who has represented the district both in legislation and constituent services. I and he had similar records. I think there's time now for leadership. There is no leadership here, and there is no performance.
Congressman?
I'm proud of my record, Gabe. I've lived now in Westchester County for 29 years, and I've seen Westchester County grow from a bedroom community to one of the most impressive and economically stable regions in the country. And I'm proud to say that it wasn't a government program that made Westchester County what it is today. It was the people. And that's why I left a career after 22 years in business to run for Congress, to see whether I can continue this as the greatest opportunity society the world has ever seen. And I've delivered for Westchester County. 2 weeks ago, Mayor Noto and I, Mamaroneck, announced $4.3 million for senior citizens housing. Just my very last vote was on H.R. 6. Congressman Ottinger, for 10 years, has been looking to get authorized a massive flood control bill. Guess what? Joe DioGuardi got it yesterday, $58 million dollars, and also for the Sheldrake River, the Eastchester Creek.
Thank you,
in
Congressman.
I would have to object to that.
Thank you, Bella Abzug and Congressman Joseph DioGuardi. I know that you both object to things you have said, but we're out of time. Mrs. Regan Badillo DioGuardi and Ms. Abzug, I thank you all for being with us. Next Sunday, we hope to have the candidates for United States Senator from New York. A week later, on the Sunday before election, the candidates for governor. Gabe Pressman, good afternoon.